So I'm your host today, and I'm a member, I'll get into it in a little bit, but basically I'm a member of the cybersecurity program, cybersecurity team at ARC, slip of the tongue there, one of my other activities at ARC. And so today we're going to be talking about product security, managing product security, and what that means, and I'll get into that in a few moments. But before I do, let me introduce our panelists. So, and you're screwing me up not sitting in the order you show up in here, but so we have Matt over here on my far right, Nathan next to him, and Brad. It is Brad, isn't it? Yes, Brad, okay. Brad and Rob I don't know as well, and Rob here. So they're panelists. The format of this session is I'm going to give some opening remarks, probably, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes or so, sort of framing the subject. And then from there, it's a free-for-all. It's an open question and answer. You'll have an opportunity to ask any questions you have of the panelists. And I hope it to be very interactive, and so we can engage in a discussion on the subject. So without further ado, okay, what did I do? Oh, yep. See, I failed the first test. No, there it is. I have to click on.
IT's coming.
I got it.
One moment, please. Your call is important to us.
Okay, all right.
It's okay.
He told me, I just forgot.
There we go. It's been a long day. It's cool.
Yeah.
There we go.
Hey, I'm an old guy, so I'll just blame it on my age. So as I said, with that little blip, managing hardware and software product security. So we'll get into this in a little bit here. The picture you see on this slide is a more up-to-date picture. So I don't know why ARC still uses the old one. Before I get into the subject, I just wanted to acknowledge the other members of the ARC cybersecurity team. So we have from right to left, we have Sid Snitkin, who is back here in the audience, I see, and Larry O'Brien, who is also back in the audience, and Mark Lucif. So the four of us basically manage the ARC practice on industrial cybersecurity. Sid is the practice lead. So what are we going to talk about today? I'll keep my remarks short so that we can keep this as interactive as possible. I'm going to give you a bit of an overview or an introduction to the subject and kind of frame what we want to talk about. An introduction and then a shaping of the subject to talk about, to frame what we're going to talk about. Then we'll have a panel discussion and a close. So pretty simple, all right? And my slides really are just the first two items on this agenda. So what's our topic? Hardware and software product security. So for OT systems, the question is, the overall prevailing rhetorical question is, how do you ensure the systems or the security of both installed, i.e. legacy systems, components and systems, and those that you're considering for purchase and installation? How do you get a warm fuzzy, a comfortable feeling about their inherent security capabilities? And that's the subject that we're going to explore. So one of the things that we do at ARC, we research these topics, and you've heard, and probably if you're an ARC client, how many people here are ARC clients? Okay, good. So you're familiar, if you're an ARC client, you know that we publish insights and strategy reports, and we provide market analyses and sort of things on various subjects. So if we hear a question from one of our clients, or if we come up with one on our own in the course of our general research, we say, well, that's something we might want to pursue. So I'm going to give you an idea about how I pursue those. I come up with these ideas every once in a while. Some of them are brain farts, and some of them actually turn into something. But so the first thing I do is I sit down and start posing some questions. My experience as an end user or an asset owner before I came to ARC I worked in the chemical industry for many years. So I approach these things as an end user. So I try to ask myself, as an end user, what kind of questions might I ask on this subject? And I brainstorm these questions and I write them down and I go off and do some research to try to answer those questions, to get the sort of a best industry view on what, how to address these questions. Generative AI has been a godsend for me. It's made that job easier. Generative AI does not write my research reports, my reports and insights. The way I describe it is I use, whether it's ChatGPT or whatever the tool happens to be, and I use all of them, Copilot and so forth, they're my research assistant. So for example, those of you with experience either as a student or otherwise in academia, you know that when someone's doing research, they have a research assistant. I used to be a research assistant when I was in school for a while. And the professor says, go find this out. Here are a bunch of questions, go do some research and come back to me. I'm old enough that you used to do this in a paper card catalog, in a book of abstracts, right? But nowadays we have generative AI. So I research the answers to these questions, and that forms the beginning of a response. And that response can be a discussion, as it is here today. It can be a paper, like an insight or a strategy report. It could be a report back to a client if you're doing a consulting engagement. But basically, you shape the subject and then go from there. So it's not rocket science. You get the idea. So these are the questions I came up with. And this is not meant to be an exclusive or confining list. So we're not going to necessarily limit our discussion to these questions. But I just came up with a starting list to give you a thought of, what went through my mind when I started asking this or looking into this subject. So what's the current status of hardware and software product security? Thumbs up, thumbs down, good, bad, neutral, however you want to do it, qualitative kind of assessment. How effective are the standards? I didn't go into an introduction very much, but those of you that know me know that I'm very involved in standards setting, standards of development. I co-chair the committee responsible for the 62443 standards. So that had to be one of the questions on my list. How effective are the standards in defining what's required? Specific to the US, this is a specific US question, can CISA, the federal government, can their security by design efforts really make a major impact? And I'm sure there are lots of different opinions here about just exactly how much influence the government has on the private sector. What's the role of regulations? And again, lots of different opinions. Some people say, no, I'm a free market person, I'm a libertarian, let the industry figure it out. Other people say, no, at some point the government's got to come in and lay down the law. What's the value of conformance testing and certification? How do you know when your supplier or prospective supplier says, oh no, we develop our products, we do secure by design, they're rock solid. Do you take their word for it? Are there implications arising from the use of artificial intelligence? We were asked, the ARC folks, the analysts and the consultants like myself, to try to weave in AI to all of our subjects. And I struggled a little bit with this one in this particular case, but AI is everywhere now. So what are the implications of AI in ensuring product security? Software bills of material, and when I wrote this, I formed it as two questions. Software bills of materials are so-called SBOMs. There's also the hardware analog, the HBOM, the hardware bill of material, which is probably most people are more familiar with. What steps should end users or asset owners, I use both terms because I'm more comfortable with the asset owner term, but ARC prefers end user. What steps should the end user be taking as they engage with their supplier partners? And then lastly, what steps should the suppliers be taking? The complementary view, right? Because they have a different perspective on things. They're delivering products to the market. They obviously, everything that they have to do costs money, and that they have to reflect that in their pricing and marketing and so on and so forth. So you get the idea. These are just the questions to kind of shape the subject matter. So a little bit on the status. Where are we today? And again, this is at 50,000 feet or more. just to kind of set the basis. I'm sure you could add lots of things to this list. In the software area, there's a lot of talk about the software development lifecycle, and particularly a secure development lifecycle. So making sure that software is secure by design. This started, outside of the OT space. This started many years ago when, how many people here remember the famous Microsoft stand down where they basically stopped all their product development for 6 months or something and said, everybody's going back to school to learn how to write secure code. Which leads into the next one, secure coding practices, because guess what? I used to write software for a living many years ago, when I worked for my employer. And back then we didn't give like one bit of thought about security because we were using systems that weren't connected to anything. So security really wasn't a big factor. And what about zero trust? Another buzzword. It's a catchphrase that's caught on. So what about zero trust architecture? So those are just some examples of some questions in the software space. In the hardware space, trusted platform modules. All right, so what does that mean? How does that factor into the equation? Hardware root of trust, another phrase that you hear thrown around. And supply chain security, this can be a big one. How do you know that and we talked, the five of us met last night, and we talked about preparing for this session. And one of the topics we covered was, how do you know the provenance of the hardware you're buying? Just because it's got vendor X's label on it, how do you know it's not counterfeit? How do you know it doesn't have a backdoor built in, right? Now the same applies to software, but it tends to have gotten more attention from the hardware perspective. Standards and guidance, topic near and dear to my heart. As I said, I've devoted a good chunk of my life to developing what a lawyer once told me that I should refer to as proven and accepted industry practice or engineering practice. Because I used the term, I said to him, standards define best practices, and he kind of cringed. He says, don't use that phrase. I said, why? And he says, if you're ever called to be an expert witness and you say best practice to an attorney, the first thing they're going to ask you is, how do you know it's the best? Prove to me that it's the best. So he said, it's really better to talk about proven and accepted engineering practice. So that was a lesson I learned, and it stuck with me all these years. How to address industry-specific needs. Standards, by definition, are meant to cover as wide of a range of application as possible. In the 62443 standards, for one specific example, when we defined those standards initially, and I've been on the committee since its inception, we purposely avoided defining our scope in terms of sectors. We defined it in terms of consequence. So, and as my mother used to say, bless her soul, when somebody asked my mother one time how she managed to have 3 children over 11 years, and she said it was more good luck than good management. And so in our committee, it was more good luck than good management. But it served us very well, is because our standards now are not limited to any particular collection of sectors. How do you ensure compliance and accountability? Accountability is a big one. That should have a capital A. That's a big word. And also enabling certification and assurance, because the people buying these systems and employing them are taking on a tremendous amount of risk. They shoulder the consequence element of the risk equation, so they need to have assurances that they're in a good position to do that. Some of the challenges related to standards and guidance. We all know, how many people, you've all heard the standards are wonderful. What you always hear about standards is 2 things. One is standards are wonderful, we have so many of them. And the second one is standards are wonderful because they take so long to create, okay? The pace of change far outstrips the ability to standardize. Adoption and implementation, the committees that develop the standards they're not responsible for promoting adoption and implementation. They're there to capture that proven and accepted practice. And the complexity, oh hell, I mean, in cybersecurity, I shared with somebody the other day, I said, when we started the ISA 99 committee to develop what became 62443, in one of the best examples of infinite naivete that I've ever heard, we said, we can address this. It was like, I can name that tune in 3 notes. We said, we can address this subject with 2 standards and 2 technical reports. Take a look at 62443 today. I see Camilo back there smiling. Yeah, so roles and regulations, also a major factor. Again, now you start getting into geopolitical concerns, regional concerns, but regardless of the constituency or the domain you're talking about, you're looking at minimum security baselines, enhancing accountability. Basically, it's whose neck do I wring is what it comes down to. Protecting consumers and the critical infrastructure, because ultimately the bad consequences are going to impact them. We used to have a saying that we used in my previous life in the chemical industry that we have an unwritten license to operate. And it's given to us by society. And if we do something really stupid, society's going to pull our license. And so that's what I meant by that. Promoting transparency and trust. Security and trust, sometimes work against each other. Adoption of best practices, and then enforcement and, dare I say, penalties, right? I'm not in the regulatory business, but there can be penalties. I was one of the authors of the cybersecurity components of the now defunct critical, chemical facility anti-terrorism standards in the US, CFATS, and they did have teeth. Benefits of testing and certification. I'm not going to go through this in the interest of time because I want to keep my contribution to a manageable amount, but you can see these, if you're into standards, defining that proven engineering practice, and then actually confirming that people are doing it. That's what that's all about, is the testing and certification. One of my roles many years ago was I actually got certified as an internal ISO 9000 auditor. And I didn't know anything about ISO 9000. It's a quality standard if you're not familiar with it. And the expert said to me as they were giving us the training, he said, it's very simple. He says, like all auditing, it's when you go into a facility to audit them, you ask 2 questions. Tell me, or do you say what you do? Do you have documentation? And then do you do what you say? Right? So you talk to the people that set the policy and you get to say what you do, and then you talk to people that do the job and you get the other half, and they better match. So compliance with standards, and then simplified procurement. Obviously we all have to procurement. I threw in this question about AI because, like I said, this was a bit of a wild card, but AI is so nascent right now and so new and moving so fast. I'm sure there are people already doing some of these things, and I'm sure that there are ripe opportunities in areas like enhanced threat detection, for example. Threat detection amounts to crunching a tremendous amount of data. AI is tailor-made for that. Predictive analysis, automated response, and increased productivity. And the automated response one is actually kind of fascinates me, because when cybersecurity became, industrial cybersecurity, OT cybersecurity became a thing, all the focus was on detection, gathering your asset inventory, being able to put a system in that would generate all the alerts and so on and so forth. And it was a little bit like alarm management was a generation before. It falls under the heading of be careful what you wish for, because you might get it. So people said, we need all this data. And then the next thing they know, they're digging themselves out from a pile of data trying to figure out what to do with it. So being able to analyze that data and come up with a meaningful response is really important. Bills of material, I talked about it at the outset. I think we know what those are. It's all about provenance. The same way as if you buy a piece of art and you want to know where it came from and is it legitimate and is it really worth that horrendous amount of money your spouse or significant other convinced you to pay for it. You want to be able to have some warm fuzzy that it's actually worth what they're asking. Transparency, it helps with regulatory compliance, and it can also help with incident response, because now you know what you're dealing with. If you're going to fix your car, it's nice to know what's in it, or have your car fixed.